Thank you, everyone. I know it was a long night. I hope it's going to be a good discussion. My name is Amir. One of the solution architects working with AWS. I've been with AWS for a couple of years now, but my whole professional life been around .NET, and from day one, technically. I still count myself sometimes as a .NET developer, and it's for sure it's area of my interest. Today I'm going to talk about how if you have a .NET application or a Windows application, if you want to do the migration, what are the steps that you can actually do to bring your workload across. Or also, I'm going to introduce some free tools which help you with the modernization of your .NET application as well. Let's go through the agenda. I'm going to quickly talk about the migration journey. I'm not going to go too deep on it, but just to let you know how it's going to look like a journey of the migration. I'm going to talk about common Microsoft workload migration patterns, and identity and Active Directory migration, SQL Server workloads, and .NET workload in specific. It's going to be the big chunk of it. And also I'm going to talk about some of the program AWS has that can support that migration. In terms of the migration journey, in AWS we have a formulated way of the migration. I'm not going to go too deep on that, but technically we have few phases of migration. The first phase, we call it assess. This is the area that we are analyzing your workload before bringing it to the AWS to capture some data, find some dependencies. In mobilize phase, this is the area we plan and create the wave of migration, finding dependencies and make sure you're ready and that you have the plan developed. And when you migrate, while you're running and migrating, when you're bringing your workload to AWS, there are services that can support your workload. And after migration, this is the area you can start modernizing your applications to use some of the more cloud-native services that AWS offer. Let's have a look at the common Microsoft workload. In terms of the common Microsoft workload, you usually have an identity and access management piece, which in some of the Microsoft workload is Active Directory. You have a database layer, which is a SQL Server, Microsoft SQL Server in most of the case, and also a middle layer, which we're going to talk is a .NET application. In terms of the identity and access management for Active Directory, you have technically three choices to bring it on AWS. The first is bringing your Active Directory as is on AWS and run it on a VM, the equivalent of VM on AWS is EC2. The second option is using a managed service AWS offers, which is a service, fully managed service compatible with Microsoft AD. And the other one is using AWS AD connector, which is technically just a proxy gateway for you to connect to your Active Directory wherever it's hosted. In terms of self-managed Active Directory on EC2, technically you're just talking about setting up a Windows machine and just promote it to an Active Directory or a domain controller. It can be a domain controller, a new domain controller, or it can be part of your existing domain controller. Obviously, if you want to run it on AWS and you have your domain controller already as a forest, for example, or in your on-prem, you need to have that connectivity back. Either it's VPN or using a services direct line like AWS Direct Connect. The benefit to that is you have is VM. You have full access to the underlying machine. It's self-managed, but the downside of it, you need to take care of high availability and scalability, things like that. The second option you have is AWS Managed Microsoft AD. This is a managed service, fully managed service by AWS. You don't need to be worried about the scalability or availability and things like that. the things you need to be worried about when you're running on a VM. And also it gives you the opportunity to have one-way or two-way trust to your workload, to your on-prem Active Directories. Obviously, you need that connection back. If an extension of your Active Directory, you need that connectivity back to your on-prem, wherever you are running your Active Directories. The benefit of that is fully managed, and also it doesn't have the burden of managing services, being high availability and things like that. And also the other benefit is it has more integration with AWS services. The last option, which is most of the people and most of the companies they use when they want to do migration as a part of the few steps they're doing, is AD Connect, which is purely a proxy back to your Active Directory. If you have Active Directory on-prem or somewhere else, like in Azure AD, you want to have that connectivity, you can use a proxy, that service, to connect back to wherever your Active Directory is for your authentication purpose without being cached, right? There is no data is being cached. Next, go to the SQL Server Migration Patterns, right? Let's say you have the database layer, which is most likely Microsoft SQL Server. You want to bring that on board on AWS platform. There are a few options to do that. The first option is, again, you can run that SQL Server as is on a virtual machine on AWS, right, on an EC2. The good things about it is you have full control over the underlying machine, OS and database. But the downside of it is you need to deal with the licensing and also high availability of that machine. Make sure it's replicated across, highly available, backup, restore. They all need to be managed by you, like you maintain your database on-prem. The other option is the Amazon RDS for SQL Server. This is a service, actually managed service, the managed SQL Server, managed service by AWS. That think about as a hosted SQL Server, which is highly available. You don't need to be worried about the licensing. You don't need to be worried about high availability, automatic backup and restore, disaster recovery, and things like that. And it does the things we call it it take away the things we call it in AWS undifferentiated heavy lifting, and you can focus on some things actually matter to your business. But there are some limitations around that. If you are a .NET developer or you are using SQL Server, if you're using legacy, you may know that in past there was like some partner packages or something like CLRs that were you need like more administrative access to your underlying machine, which was not available on RDS. In last year reInvent, we introduced a service called Amazon RDS Custom, which is give you the both benefit of the both worlds. You have access to the underlying machine. For example, now CLRs are supported, while you don't need to be worried about the things like high availability or redundancy, or things actually you get as a benefit of a managed service. There is another project which is open source I want to introduce to you. It's called Babelfish for Aurora. If one day you decided you want to go move away from Microsoft SQL for any reason, but you want to develop still work with the Microsoft SQL and develop still as it is, but underneath you want to use different engine like Postgres, the Babelfish is an open source project that can help you to do that. What it does actually, it gives you two different endpoints. One is this Postgres endpoints, and one is Microsoft SQL endpoints. Your application, they don't notice the difference, but actually underlying engine is Postgres, but your application is still talking to Microsoft SQL, all right? And there's a lot of cost benefits. You can save massive licensing costs here. And it's open source project. In terms of the migration path, there are a few ways you can migrate a SQL Server to AWS. The first one is the sum of the service we provide, like the database migration service, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. You can do exactly the same as you bringing the other virtual machines to AWS using the sum of the services we have, like AWS Application Migration Service. If you previously worked with the services like CloudEndure, for example, you should be familiar with this kind of service. These are the kind of service that does the block replication. And also there are features inside SQL Server natively supported that you can use to bring your workloads on AWS. For example, things like backup and restore, or distributed availability groups that is natively is part of the SQL Server. In terms of the DMS DMS service, database migration service, that database migration service is technically what it does. You have a database, you want to bring it on, and that one you spin up DMS replication instance, which is a low spec virtual machine, which DMS spin up for you on the line, and you give it a source database and a target database, right? And it brings that data to AWS for you. You can have different target. It can be like even an RDS, or it can be different type of database. You can go from SQL Server to Aurora or to Postgres. And also you can benefit from the database freedom. You can also transform as you're migrating your data, both schema and data. The other way is, as I mentioned, CloudEndure is a block replication. Like bringing any server or migrating any server, you can do this block replication. There is a service on AWS called Application Migration Service. What it does, technically, it's you install some agents on your cloud environment, and those ones detect the changes as a block replicated, continuously replicated to AWS platform. And when you want to have that replication on AWS, when you want to promote it as a standalone, you can do that. You stop the replication, you cut off, you promote that as a standalone database or any other server. In this case, it's database servers. And you get an exact clone of what you have on your on-prem on AWS platform. Another option is the server migration service. If you are not, for any reason, you are not able to run agents on your environment for any reason, what you can do, you can use another service, and that service is agentless. And if you are using on a Hyper-V, Microsoft Hyper-V, or you are using on a VMware, it's capable of talking to them and get a snapshot of your data underlying disk and make it an image, and you can spin up an EC2 instance based on that image to bring your data to AWS. And the other option is a native SQL. If you are using SQL Server, for example, Enterprise Edition, you have this distributed availability group options that is mostly used for disaster recovery. But you also can use it for the migration. You can use that to set up your disaster recovery or your cloned environment on AWS or any other cloud provider, and use this functionality to replicate your data onto the cloud. And at some point, you can stop that traffic and promote your disaster recovery as a standalone server, which is a valid way of migration. Okay, let's go to the interesting part, to the .NET migration part. This piece I'm going to talk about like some of the migration, the tools and the services AWS has that can help you to modernize and migrate your migration to the AWS, or generally for the modernization purpose. Matt talked about the history timeline of .NET. And as most of you are aware, that at some point Microsoft decided to stop .NET Full, and kicked off the .NET Core, and eventually they sought to stop the .NET Full, supporting .NET Full, and then they now had a jump to .NET 5, and after that .NET 6, and from now on it's going to be .NET Core based platform, cross-platform, and probably at some point everyone's thinking of migrating whatever legacy application they have at some point to the .NET Core or .NET 5 or 6. And to support that, we have a tool. AWS has a tool, which is a free tool to use, and is a cloud independent as well. What you can do, this is a tool that you give your solution or project file, and is capable of, they call it onboarding. You onboard your application, is capable of analyzing your code and read all of those NuGet packages you have, all of the dependencies and everything, and help you to migrate your .NET Full application to a .NET Core application, or .NET 5 or .NET 6. And it's analyze all of the assemblies, analyze all of the dependency you have, also does some recommendations. For example, it says if your NuGet package version X downgraded or upgraded, if you do that, you're going to have a smooth transition to the newer version of .NET. It's a free tool. You can go and download it. You need only a Windows machine, a Windows platform to run it. In terms of what are the options you have for migration and modernization of your .NET application, the first option is rehost. This is the very first step for many companies. They run whatever they have today on-prem, they bring it as a lift and shift. They bring it and then run it on a cloud provider like AWS, which equivalent is going to be an EC2, which is a VM machine. The other options you have for a .NET workload is replatforming, right? The replatforming, we call it, if you don't want to run it as is, you are changing the platform. For example, you want to run from a VM, bring it all your workload to a managed platform. For example, something like an AWS Elastic Beanstalk, which is a managed service that manages all the infrastructure and the web servers and stuff like that for you. You just bring your code and it does it for you. Or you want to containerize it, right? You want to run it on a containerized solution, which in AWS we have two services you may be familiar with, which is Elastic Container Service ECS and EKS, which is a hosted Kubernetes version of Matt showed you a decision tree. This is similar to that, but it's like more or less which treatment plan I should use for my .NET application, right? This is like a high level, happy to share it after, but it's a high level decision tree, right? Where I should do lift and shift, right? Versus where I can containerize. What is best for me which service is best for me to use, right? It's a bit high level, and it's not, one size doesn't fit all, but generally speaking, it gives you a guideline on what is the best service you can use and what is the best way to approach a migration for a specific application. For example, if you don't have your source code, you cannot modernize that much, right? You can containerize it, but you cannot refactor it, right? These are the things, a consideration you take into account to find the treatment plan for your workload. We talked about Elastic Beanstalk. I'm just going to briefly talk about it. It's just a managed service that, as I discussed, is just for your hosting your web applications. If you want to bring your code and run it on AWS without being worried about like underlying infrastructure or IIS servers and stuff like that, you can do it on Elastic Beanstalk. And this one shows you the yellow part. This is what AWS manages, and your application, this is the area that you need to manage Technically, you just give it a repository, you bring your application, and it gives you an endpoint to run your application. In terms of like replatforming it on Elastic Beanstalk, if your application is already running on a .NET Core, you can bring it to a Linux platform as is, right? If your application running on it's a Windows-based or a full framework, you want to bring it as is and then you modernize it using a tool I introduced you, for example, the porting assistant for .NET, right? I know the other tools as well around that you can use benefit them, but this is one way. Usually we do as a one-step migration, then modernization, except it's very like simple application that you can refactor it. And creating this Elastic Beanstalk package is not always easy, right? You need some configuration. You may need some tweak in your application to be able to host an Elastic Beanstalk. To make your life easy, there is an open source shell script is available on GitHub that's interactive. What it does the job for you technically. If you have like an ASP.NET application, what it does, you run that shell script, and it's an interactive shell script where it selects all of the sites that you can migrate, and you can pick one. It discover all of the connection strings you have. It gives you an option to change it on the fly, and it generates Elastic Beanstalk deployment bundle for you, and eventually it deploys it to the Elastic Beanstalk. And when you have your application on the cloud, you can have different versions or different environments. The second other tool I want to introduce is for replatforming, and it's called App2Container. Again, free tools for you if you want to use. What it does, it helps you to containerize an existing application. When an existing is working for .NET and Java, and when we are talking about .NET, we are talking about .NET Full, because as you know, the .NET Core is already ready to be containerized, right? The way it's written and the host and everything. But for .NET Full, you may have some problems with MVCs and some of the ASP.NET applications. The way it works under the hood, again, same concept. You run it on a Windows application, Windows machine that has IIS running. It's select all of the IIS sites you are running that can be containerized, right? And analyze all of the dependencies. Again, give you an option to change your connection string on the fly, and extract all of the necessary artifact. Then it deploys to S3 bucket. From there, you can create an image and either push it to an ECR or on a container. It also has an option to create a task for ECS or pod for container for EKS, which is a Kubernetes pod. It's make life much easier, right? Rather than doing it yourself. The other interesting free tools I want to talk about today is for modernizing. There is other free tools AWS has. It's again kind of platform agnostics, extractor for .NET, and this is gonna help you if you've been in the situation that you have to break down a monolithic to a microservices. You know how hard it is. Depends on the complexity of the application. Most of the people in .NET's world, they went through that at least a couple of times. And this tool gonna help you to make your life easier, actually. Let's have a look at the journey of how you are extracting or how you are starting decoupling an application to a microservice architecture. The first step, you're identifying what you want to extract. Right? We call it usually low-hanging fruits. For example, like logging functionality, right? Arbitrary example. Then you regroup them together, right? You say, okay, this logging has these functionality around that, which is going to come as an independent service, deployable. And then you may need to do some refactoring, right? Because you may need to, for example, as in terms of the MVC, you have models, right? They need to be copied across, that you can bring that as a bundle. Then you extract that piece as a standalone service. Then you can deploy that as a standalone service. Then you go back to your remaining monolithic and refactor that to, rather than using the internal classes, call that and use that microservice instead. And then, of course, you do testing and releasing. Wherever is yellow, that tool gonna help you, is automate that. Wherever is green, blue, blind color, you need to do some manual work. For example, this tool gonna help you to onboard the application, analyze all the dependency you have, including runtime. For example, if you're calling a dependency using a reflection, it also detects that. You can give it a runtime. And allows you to extract as a separate group or group them. Technically, what you are trying to do here, you are defining your service boundaries. If you think it as like, for example, I'm logging all of these classes around that, I'm gonna define that, and eventually you're gonna extract that as a separate service. And it's give you a separate solution file that you can be deployed, right? It's also refactor your existing monolithic to use create a wrapper to call that over HTTP. But for your existing monolithic, maybe it's not 100%. There are some things you need to be like if you have like a complex logic inside your constructors, it's not 100%, right? You may do some manual work. Other services I just want to mention as an option there. Matt went through that, light sales. That Amazon light sale is if you have a simple application, very simple application, or you want to have a test environment or sandbox environment, you don't want to spend too much, you want an easy solution, you may want to consider light sale, right? Which is easy to use for running web apps and websites. Technically, think about it as just there are some blueprints. You go there, it gives you all environments you need to run your application. If you want to develop like a .NET application, there are some blueprints there that can give you the app or just the OS that you can select and you can deploy your code as a test. It's also a managed service. And when to choose it, obviously, as I said, if you have a small scale, it's not for a large scale. If it's a small scale multi-tier application, just testing. If you want to get free database, not free databases, cheap databases on open source databases, you can get you can use light sales. But if most of the cases, if you have this large multi-tier application, you want to do modernization, probably you have to build your infrastructure on AWS. The last thing I just want to talk is if you have a very legacy Windows application. As you know, Windows 2008 and 2008 R2, they reached the end of support, but there are still some workloads that you may need to run. To do that, there is a tool that's gonna work as an emulator. There is a program that program's gonna analyze the dependency of this workload you have, and create a wrapper around that wrapper is gonna run your application on more modern Windows, like Windows 2012 or 2016, without your application notified. I think about it as an emulator with the whole bundle. These are some of the technically some of the things I just want to talk today in terms of the migration and modernization options you have on AWS, and introduce some of the tools, especially the free tools we have. Some of them are platform agnostics. You don't need to, I mean, for example, Microsoft extractors, you don't need to even bring your workload on AWS. It just helps you to decouple your monolithic. I just want to go through that. Any question you have, I will be happy to answer. And other than that, yeah, we're good.
I'll start then. Question 1, Babelfish. Is that with them store procedures?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, really?
Yeah. Babelfish works with the store procedures, functions, triggers. There is a list publicly available, what is supported, what is not.
So it converts, well, most of them, the SQL Server features to Postgres then?
Yes. What is working underneath, it's a Postgres. And the Babelfish itself is an open source project, which is under Apache 2 and Postgres licensing. What it does, it sits, I mean, technically, it sits in the same cluster as Postgres, and it's, in terms of the performance, also is pretty good. But it supports store procedures, it supports triggers, it supports functions. Couple of things you may, for example, if you're using a management SQL Server Management Studio, that the nice tree you may get in the left-hand side for like adding stuff, you may have still something in progress on that, but from the query analyzer and the query, you get all of that.
What about MySQL then?
Sorry?
What about MySQL?
Oh no, it's for Postgres at the moment. Yeah.
No.
So.
Can you convert MySQL database so that the applications can? So if your source database is MySQL,
yes,
and you want to convert it to Postgres, does Babelfish do that as well, or is it just solely for SQL Server and Postgres?
No, Babelfish is an interpreter, sits on top of Postgres to make it compatible with Microsoft SQL Server. For example, if you have entity framework or store procedure, your applications, they don't feel the underlying database changed, right? If you want to totally convert a MySQL to, for example, another database, that database migration service we discussed, it allows you to have different source and target. For example, you can go from the database MySQL to Postgres, but you should know that if it's only table and data, it's easy. But if you have things which is not supported, you may need to do some manual refactorings on that.
Okay. What about Oracle then? How would you migrate Oracle to Postgres? Because we got Oracle and I'd love to move away.
Yeah, to be honest, exact feature. Happy to have that discussion. I'm not a database specialist, but if you want, I'm happy to have that discussion later. But generally speaking, what the feature exactly in Oracle supported to bring to them, I'm not aware of that. But generally speaking, there could be something you are using in Oracle that is not supported in MySQL. I'm not expert on DB, but what I can tell you, there are ways you can convert your schema. There is things actually in database migration service. It's called for the schema conversion. You can change your database from one source to a different target, right? But it also tells you what is supported, what is not supported, right? You may run it on your source database, and it's gonna tell you what is supported and if you can do or not.
You know, yeah, I'm gonna have a bad habit of asking questions, so I'm gonna make this last question. You know, the slide before that one. Can you put that slide up again? You refer to a compatibility package for running all legacy applications, and we've got lots. So how would you do that then? This
is a tool. For example, if you're going to AWS platform now, if let's say you have an application, that application needs to be run on Windows 2008. But the 2008 or Windows 2003 are end of life support. You cannot go on AWS platform to spin up a 2003 server, right? How you want to bring that, how you want to run that on more like Windows 2019, for example, right? Maybe the requirements are different. This tool gonna help you to wrap that application but that application still feels is running on Windows 2003, for example, but is actually hosting on a more modern Windows server, like 2016 or 2019, right? This is just, but they are all you have to think about them as interim solution, right? This is like migration and modernization. You have a migration phase and a modernization phase, right? Which you wanna go away probably from that application, except you have a specific reason you want to stay with that, right? Yeah. People are just this is just interim solution. You bring your workload, you shut down your data centers, then you want to modernize. Either you define a project from scratch to rewrite it with the modern architecture, or there are different modernization patterns you can apply.
What's that tool called?
EMP.
Oh, okay.
Any other question? Thank you then.